The 1960s gave us moon landings, muscle cars, and mind-bending sci-fi, but not every futuristic vision was welcome on the big screen. Some films didn't just raise eyebrows, they sent governments, studios, and military officials scrambling to shut them down. Why? Because these stories cut a little too close to reality. What happens when a fictional movie tells the truth powerful people don't want you to hear? Let's dig into 10 films from the 60s that proved the future could be dangerous, even when it was just a movie. Panic in Year Zero, 1962. Imagine this. You've just survived a nuclear blast, the city's gone, and every neighbor you ever trusted is now a potential threat. That's the premise of Panic in Year Zero, and in 1962, right in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it hit way too close to home. Starring and directed by Ray Milland, the film followed a family fleeing Los Angeles after a nuclear strike, armed with shotguns, stolen supplies, and a ruthless determination to survive at any cost. It wasn't your clean, patriotic survival story. This wasn't about rallying under the flag or trusting Uncle Sam to swoop in and save the day. Instead, it showed ordinary Americans turning into looters, vigilantes, and cold-blooded opportunists the moment the system collapsed. In Ohio, officials yanked it from theaters after just 3 days, claiming it was dangerous propaganda. In Alabama, one censor declared, "This isn't entertainment. It's a how-to guide for the breakdown of society." The timing was deadly to its chances. With tensions at an all-time high between the US and the Soviet Union, even a hint that the government couldn't protect its people was enough to set off alarm bells. The Pentagon reportedly studied audience reactions, worried it could trigger panic near military bases. What's wild is that the controversy only helped the movie make money. Shot for $435,000, it grossed over $1.2 million despite being banned in several states. Milland insisted it was a wake-up call, not a manual for chaos. But officials saw it differently. They thought it was pulling the thin veil off America's "we'll be fine" nuclear defense story. Whether you saw it as fear-mongering or a warning, one thing's certain. Panic in Year Zero showed that in a real crisis, the ugliest parts of human nature wouldn't need much encouragement to surface. Wild in the Streets, 1968. If you think 60s sci-fi was all space helmets and laser guns, Wild in the Streets will shock you. This outrageous satire imagined a rock star taking over the presidency and putting teenagers in charge of the government. His first order of business: ship everyone over 35 to re-education camps and dose them with mind-altering substances to keep them quiet. Yes, really. American International Pictures didn't hide the provocation. The tagline alone, "There's a time to live, a time to die, a time to listen to the voices of 14-year-olds, was practically begging for outrage. And it got it. In Chicago, Detroit, and Washington, D.C., theaters pulled it after local leaders claimed it had directly inspired youth protests. In San Francisco, one screening ended with audience members walking straight into an ongoing street demonstration, some of them later arrested and citing the film as their inspiration. The backlash reached the Senate floor, where Senator Margaret Chase Smith labeled it treasonous entertainment. Senior citizen groups picketed theaters, furious over scenes of elderly Americans being mocked and locked away. The California Board of Education even discussed classifying it as political material that required parental permission for viewers under 18. But the public? They lined up for it. On an $800,000 budget, the movie pulled in $4.3 million, proving controversy sells. Star Christopher Jones later claimed he was questioned by FBI agents about whether he supported the film's anti-establishment message. Was it just an over-the-top piece of counterculture satire, or was it a dangerous call to arms for a generation already itching for change? Either way, Wild in the Streets tapped directly into 1968's generational powder keg and made sure the explosion was loud enough for Washington to hear. Seconds, 1966. If there was ever a film that made people squirm in their seats, and not in a good way, it was Seconds. Directed by John Frankenheimer and starring Rock Hudson in a rare, deeply serious role, it told the story of a man so disillusioned with his life that he pays a secret organization to erase him and give him a brand new identity, complete with a surgically altered face and a fresh set of credentials. Sounds like escapist sci-fi, right? Not the way Frankenheimer shot it. Using warped camera lenses, distorted close-ups, and a relentlessly claustrophobic style, Seconds dragged viewers into the psychological nightmare of a man realizing his shiny new life is just another cage. Studio execs at Paramount freaked out after test screenings, where audience members reportedly walked out pale and shaken. Some even claim to feel physically sick from the visuals. The anti-materialist message, the idea that chasing status and possessions was empty, didn't exactly sit well with corporate America. The studio cut 8 minutes from the film, toned down the most disturbing scenes, and then quietly buried it with minimal promotion. In Britain, censors demanded a staggering 76 edits before approving it with an X rating. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it outright for its despairing message, and psychological groups worried it could be harmful for viewers struggling with identity or life satisfaction. To make matters more complicated, Hudson's own life added an unspoken layer to the film. His portrayal of a man hiding his true self resonated with some viewers in ways the studio probably didn't intend. That subtext only deepened the discomfort among critics and execs. Seconds bombed in 1966, vanishing into obscurity for decades, but it slowly built a cult following, especially among filmmakers who admired its unflinching tone. Today, it's recognized as a chilling critique of the hollow promises of reinvention, one so sharp that Paramount decided most people weren't ready to see it. The Mindbenders, 1963. Before the public knew the words mind control or MKUltra, The Mindbenders was already dramatizing it in alarming detail. Directed by Basil Dearden and starring Dirk Bogarde, this psychological thriller centered on British and American scientists experimenting with sensory deprivation tanks to break down and reprogram human personalities. What made it unsettling wasn't the premise, but how closely it resembled classified research programs that were actually happening at the time. In the movie, prolonged isolation in a tank left characters vulnerable to extreme suggestion. The government used this to strip away loyalties, rewrite relationships, and reshape identities. That's not far from what real intelligence agencies were attempting during the Cold War. The accuracy of the tank scenes, the methods, and the psychological fallout raised red flags for officials who thought it might be revealing too much. In the US, the film got a strangely limited release, and several key sequences were cut, especially those explaining the step-by-step conditioning process. Dearden later hinted that government representatives had approached him about making changes during production, requests he refused. Bogarde himself recalled being cornered at a party by a man claiming to be a government scientist who cryptically asked, "How much did you really know?" The most unsettling scene, in which Bogarde's character has his love for his wife systematically erased, reportedly caused walkouts during its premiere. In Canada, the film was shown only with a disclaimer claiming the science was fictional, even though much of it was based on real research. Looking back, The Mindbenders plays less like fiction and more like a quiet whistleblower in movie form. It didn't cause mass panic, but it might have caused some government officials a few sleepless nights. Colossus, The Forbin Project, 1969. The late 1960s loved a good machines take over the world story, but Colossus, The Forbin Project made it uncomfortably real. Set in a near future where the US hands control of its nuclear arsenal to a supercomputer named Colossus, the film quickly turns into a chilling scenario. The machine makes contact with a Soviet counterpart, they link up, and together they decide humans can't be trusted with their own weapons. The premise sounds like classic pulp, but the execution was deadly serious. The film portrayed realistic Cold War politics, plausible military hardware, and convincing computer operations. Pentagon officials weren't laughing. In fact, it's been widely reported that the Department of Defense refused cooperation, fearing it might undermine public trust in America's nuclear command systems. Some suggested the film was too accurate in depicting fail-safes, command codes, and automated launch procedures. Universal Pictures also got nervous. While they didn't pull the plug, they gave it a low-profile release, with limited promotion in certain regions. The film's ending, in which Colossus calmly informs humanity it will now be ruled for its own good, hit a nerve in an era when computerization and automation were starting to creep into military decision-making. Critics were split. Some saw it as a sharp political warning. Others dismissed it as alarmist paranoia. But among Cold War strategists, it sparked genuine unease. The idea that a machine could lock out its creators wasn't just fantasy, it was a scenario quietly discussed in defense circles. Colossus didn't break box office records, but its influence lingered. Even decades later, military tech experts point to it as one of the eeriest, most grounded AI cautionary tales ever put on film. And in 1969, that was enough to make certain people in high places wish it had stayed in the script drawer. Point Blank, 1967. At first glance, Point Blank doesn't seem like it belongs on a list of censored sci-fi films. It's remembered as a gritty revenge thriller with Lee Marvin cutting a cold path through Los Angeles and San Francisco. But here's the twist. Its surreal structure, disjointed timeline, and almost dreamlike editing turned it into something far stranger than a typical crime flick. Underneath the bullets and bruises was a quiet sci-fi element. The story might not even be happening in reality. Director John Boorman leaned hard into ambiguity. Scenes jump in and out of sequence. Dialogue repeats like echoes in a malfunctioning computer program. Marvin's character, Walker, might be alive, dead, or something in between, existing in a purgatory where he's systematically dismantling a corrupt corporate machine. That was more than just an artsy flourish. In the late 60s, paranoia about government and corporate collusion was growing, and Point Blank painted a big target on both. Some city boards saw it as dangerously subversive, portraying American institutions as irredeemably rotten. In a few places, screenings were quietly discouraged or blocked, especially near military installations and government-heavy towns. The film's cold, emotionless depiction of big business power, combined with its refusal to give audiences a moral lesson, set off alarms with people who preferred their corruption stories wrapped in neat, reassuring endings. Boorman later admitted he intentionally kept the politics vague, knowing that a direct attack on U.S. systems would have been cut to ribbons. But even the ambiguity wasn't enough to save it from limited runs in some markets. For audiences who did see it, Point Blank became more than a revenge story. It was a stripped-down, unsettling vision of America's future if money and power completely replaced accountability. That vision was too close for comfort. Failsafe, 1964. Released the same year as Dr. Strangelove, Failsafe was its deadly serious cousin, and for the Pentagon, that was the problem. Directed by Sidney Lumet, it followed the nightmare scenario of a mechanical error sending U.S. bombers to destroy Moscow, with no way to call them back. The tension is unbearable, the dialogue clipped and chilling, and the ending, well, let's just say it doesn't pull punches. The issue wasn't that Failsafe was unrealistic. Quite the opposite. Military advisors who saw early cuts were alarmed by how accurately the film depicted command structures, fail-safe protocols, and the chain of events that could actually lead to accidental nuclear war. The Air Force refused any cooperation, and there were whispers that the Department of Defense quietly leaned on Columbia Pictures to delay its release. Adding to the tension, Dr. Strangelove had already secured a release slot, and the similarities in premise sparked a legal battle with author Peter George, whose novel inspired Kubrick's satire. That lawsuit stalled Failsafe long enough for Strangelove to hit theaters first, robbing Lumet's film of its shock value in the public eye. Still, when Failsafe finally premiered, it rattled audiences and some politicians with its bleak depiction of US-Soviet relations. No propaganda, no patriotic speeches, just a clinical walk through humanity's possible self-destruction. The realism was so strong that some viewers left convinced the filmmakers had insider military sources. Lumet maintained it all came from public information. If that's true, it only made the Pentagon more nervous. Dr. Strangelove, 1964. If Failsafe was the grim lecture, Dr. Strangelove was the twisted joke that made the same point. Stanley Kubrick's black comedy about a nuclear strike launched by a paranoid American general was as outrageous as it was terrifying. But behind the absurdity, Slim Pickens riding a bomb like a rodeo cowboy, Peter Sellers juggling 3 roles, was a razor-sharp critique of U.S. nuclear policy. The military didn't take kindly to the implication that America's chain of command could be hijacked by one unstable man. The Pentagon refused to cooperate, denying Kubrick access to aircraft, sets, or technical consultants. Rumors flew that officials considered trying to block the release outright, though in the end the pressure took a quieter form. Kubrick's team had to build everything from scratch and be meticulous in avoiding any classified material while still making it look authentic. Some theaters in conservative regions hesitated to book the movie, worried it was unpatriotic. A few even pulled it after local complaints. The British release faced legal issues over a character's name being uncomfortably close to that of a real Royal Air Force officer. And in the US, certain TV networks refused to air it for years, citing political sensitivity. The result? Dr. Strangelove became one of the most famous political satires ever made, precisely because it said what others wouldn't. By turning the unthinkable into dark comedy, Kubrick bypassed traditional censorship, but not without making enemies in high places. For some, the scariest part wasn't the jokes. It was the idea that the jokes might not be jokes at all. 7 Days in May 1964. A political thriller dressed in military colors, 7 Days in May wasn't technically science fiction, but its what-if scenario was close enough to make Washington sweat. Based on the best-selling novel by Fletcher Nebel and Charles W. Bailey II, it imagined a near-future America where a charismatic military general plots to overthrow the president in a bloodless coup. The weapon? Not tanks or bombers, but public trust, media manipulation, and the loyalty of the armed forces. President John F. Kennedy actually encouraged the making of the film, believing it was important to warn Americans about the dangers of military overreach. But his endorsement didn't mean smooth sailing. The Department of Defense refused to cooperate, denying access to bases, equipment, and personnel. Sensitive scenes had to be filmed on public streets outside the Pentagon because official permission was off the table. The unease wasn't just about politics, it was about timing. The Cold War was still in full swing, and the idea of a coup on U.S. soil, led by decorated officers, hit uncomfortably close to whispered fears in Washington's back rooms. Some in the military thought the film might plant dangerous ideas in the wrong heads. Director John Frankenheimer and screenwriter Rod Serling, the creator of The Twilight Zone, kept the tension razor-sharp, portraying the plot as a plausible, step-by-step operation. The result was chilling in its believability. While the movie wasn't outright banned, its lack of military cooperation and the political conversations it stirred made it a film some officials wished would quietly disappear. Instead, it became a template for later political thrillers and a reminder that the real danger might come from inside the system. The Bedford Incident, 1965. Tense, claustrophobic, and eerily believable. The Bedford Incident told the story of an American destroyer playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with a Soviet submarine in the icy North Atlantic. Richard Widmark starred as the relentless captain, pushing his crew and the situation to the breaking point. Sidney Poitier played a civilian reporter aboard the ship, there to capture the heroism of the Navy, but instead witnessing how quickly discipline could turn into disaster. The movie's final moments are still one of the most shocking endings in Cold War cinema. Without spoiling the setup, it ends with a fatal mistake that feels all too possible in a high-stakes military standoff. Critics praised its tension, but not everyone was a fan of its message. The U.S. Navy and other military-linked groups bristled at the portrayal of an American officer whose pride and obsession cause a catastrophe. While the film wasn't banned outright, certain military-affiliated theaters refused to screen it, and there were reports of screenings near naval bases being quietly discouraged. In an era where image mattered as much as capability, the Bedford Incident painted a picture of fallibility that the Pentagon preferred to keep off the public's radar. It's a lean, intense thriller with no aliens, no time machines, and no special effects, just the unnerving possibility that one bad decision could end the world. And for some officials in 1965, that was a little too close to the truth. So there you have it. 10 American-made sci-fi and near-future thrillers from the 1960s that rattled the right cages and made the wrong people nervous. Some were yanked from theaters, others quietly buried, and a few slipped through only to become legends. What's the takeaway? Sometimes the most dangerous visions of the future aren't the ones filled with monsters or spaceships. They're the ones that look a little too much like real life. Which of these would you want to see for yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and remember, what they try to hide says as much as what they let you see.